Hey, and welcome to adh-fishing TV. My name is Paulo Hoffmann, and today we're talking about the right line setup for your salmon and sea trout fishing in the river. We're going to be starting by talking about the right backing. First of all, choose your breaking strain. Make sure that your breaking strain is high enough for the target fish, so don't make your backing the weakest link. If you're fishing for big salmon, take at least 30-pound backing or even more. If you don't have much backing capacity on your reel, make sure that your backing is thin. So choose one of those PE braids or braided backings, like for example the Monster or the Ultimate X backing, for example. To connect your backing to your running line, which is the next step of your setup, you can make just a regular loop knot. Take a double surgeon knot or for example a bimini twist, which is much stronger even. But make sure that your loop is big enough to fit it around your reel or around the line that you want to connect to it, so it's much easier to rig it in the end. And also to switch around the running lines or line setups that you're choosing. Next step in our setup is the running line. There we have multiple options between a mono shooting running line, so it's basically a very thin but strong mono filament that is flat or oval, or a coated running line that we know from our weight forward single-handed lines to connect to your shooting head. So what are the pros and cons for it? If you want to cast very far, if you want to fish a sinking line, you want to get your fly and line down, a mono running line might be the choice for you because it's very thin. You have much less friction in your rings of the rod, so you can cast it very far. But it also sinks and it has less tension in the water. So if you want to be able to mend your line, if you want to maybe stabilize your shooting head in the air a little bit better, and if casting distance is not your number one priority, you're better off with a coated running line. You have multiple options here as well. You have different colors, you have different diameters. Sometimes you have little markers on your line. So if you want to make sure you're always fishing the same distance, or you want to, cast a certain distance from the very beginning, maybe you want to take a metered running line, but make sure you got the right diameter. So if you're fishing a lighter setup, if you're fishing a 7 or 8 weight, choose a thinner running line, rather than if you're fishing a heavy scheduled line, or if you're fishing a heavy shooting head on your 9 or 10 weight, then you might go a little bit heavier or thicker. So these lines enable you to mend your line a little bit more, and also to fish a faster speed. Let's say you're fishing low water conditions and you want to fish a fast fly 90 degrees. These lines have more tension in the water and speed up your fly in the swing. Next in our setup is a shooting head. On the shooting head system you have a bunch of different options, and whether one option is better than the other one is hard to say sometimes. But generally we choose between Scandi setups and scheduled setups. If you have less space behind you, if you want to fish very heavy tips, if you want to fish very heavy flies, you might want to take a scheduled setup. So if you want to fish lighter flies, if you want to be a little bit more variable with your casting, maybe Scandi style shooting head might be the better option for you. But also here we have multi-tip setups. So if you want to be very flexible in the river, you want to change between different sinking rates, and you want to fish fast water, slow water, and don't want to change your fly line all the time, you might want to take a multi-tip system, like for example these 4D multi-tip systems by Guideline. On these multi-tip lines you get your body, which is your foundation of your setup, and then you've got a whole bunch of different tips. So they come in different sinking rates, in different lengths, and sometimes in different weights. So take your body plus your sinking tip, and that's your whole shooting head setup. So you add the weights, you add the length, and then you've got basically your complete head. Sometimes you have on these 4D systems in the body already a sinking rate, like sink 1, sink 3, and then you add a sink 5, sink 7, for example. That makes it a 4D system. So you've got 4 different densities that make it easier to cover deep and long pools without having a belly in your line, and you have a straighter connection to your fly. In other systems, you've got a floating body only and different sinking tips, like on the Rio systems, for example, the Scandi Versa tip or the Skagit Versa tip, for example, if you want to fish heavier flies. Some other systems are not multi-tip systems, they're just regular shooting heads that don't need a tip in the end. Modern shooting head lines are sometimes designed to have these 3D capacities anyway, so you got these different densities built in your whole shooting head without having connections in between. And some people prefer that because the casting is just a little bit smoother than if you have loop-to-loop connections in your whole setup. But these full Scandi shooting heads, they are also able to take a poly leader in the end. So if you want to add a little bit more sinking rate to it, or if you want to balance your system just a little more, you're free to choose poly leaders in different lengths. So you can put on an 8-foot, a 10-foot, sometimes a 15, 14-foot poly leader just to balance your shooting head system a little more and to make your casting and especially your presentation just a bit more supple if you fish, for example, smaller flies. So the final step in your whole shooting head line system setup is your leader or tippet. So if you're fishing, and that's basically a ground rule to any kind of fly fishing, if you're fishing a deep sinking line or a heavy sinking tip, you don't need to take a tapered leader. You just take a straight piece of fluorocarbon or monofilament. For these big fish rivers where you have a lot of structure, a lot of rocks, obstacles in the water, we prefer fluorocarbon over any other material because it's more abrasion resistant and much stiffer. So if you have a windy day, if you fish a heavier fly, these stiffer materials turn over much easier, but they have a little bit less breaking strain most of the time than monolines. If you want to fish a little bit cheaper material, monofilament, that is also very abrasion resistant, we do like the Stroft ABR a lot because you can bump it over stones, over rocks. It doesn't really fray too much and it has a very high breaking strain on the diameter. If you are fishing light setups, so if you're fishing a light Scandi floating line, for example, and you want to make your very small fly land on the surface much smoother, then we prefer a tapered leader. So you can choose a 12-foot or a 15-foot tapered leader with your preferred breaking strain in the end, and you can add to it a short piece of tippet, let's say 60, 90 centimeters in the end, or however long you want to fish it. And this way you can perfectly adjust your tippet length and your leader length to the conditions and to your respective fishing situation. Then you can fish like super light double flies, light little tubes, or even dry flies on your Scandi setup. So that's it. Basically, you got the right choice of backing, loop it into your mono running line or coated running line respective to your specific situations, loop in your shooting head system, whether that's a multi-tip system or a complete setup like one of the 3D heads, and then add your tip, your poly, or nothing at all if you fish one of those shooting heads. And then final step is your tippet or your tapered leader, and then add your fly. You're ready to go.